Okay, friends, I'm going to bring us back together. If you could find your way to your seats. What a wonderful day it's been. Amen? It has been a great day. Well, I don't know how I got this incredible privilege to introduce our next speaker, but I'm very grateful that I did. How lucky. So, Cole Arthur Riley is a writer and a poet who was born and raised in Pittsburgh and studied writing at the University of Pittsburgh. She is the author of the New York Times bestsellers, This Here Flesh, Spirituality, Liberation, and the Stories That Make Us, and Black liturgies, prayers, poems, and meditations for staying human, both of which are for sale right outside at our book table. Her writing has been featured in The Atlantic, Guernica, and The Washington Post. Cole is also the creator and writer of the project Black Liturgies, which integrates spiritual practice with Black emotion, Black literature, and the Black body. Would you please join me in welcoming Cole Arthur Riley?
Hello. Thank you for welcoming me into your space, for being in this space with each other. We're going to talk about reclaiming the body today, reclaiming the body in an age of AI. So we'll ask, what is the spiritual cost of divorcing the mind from the body, and how do we resist a social momentum that's drawing us toward a disembodied life through the digital realm? I'm grateful to have caught just a little bit of Dr. Herzfeld's time with you. She spoke to you as an academic, and I am going to speak to you as an artist, if that's all right. I'm not much of a scholar myself. So to begin, I want to take you to a scene. It's one of the passages of literature that has been core in my own reclamation of the body. Sure? Is that better? It's one of the passages of literature that's been core in my own reclamation of the body. That is the clearing of Toni Morrison's novel, Beloved. So I'll read some of that and we can just travel to that space together. Morrison writes, "When warm weather came, baby Suggs, holy, followed by every Black man, woman, and child who could make it through, took her great heart to the clearing, a wide open space cut deep in the woods. Nobody knew for what, at the end of a path known only to deer and whoever cleared the land in the first place. And in the heat of every Saturday afternoon, she sat in the clearing while the people all waited among the trees. And she'd situate herself on this huge flat-sided rock and bow her head and pray. And the people would know she was ready when she put her stick down. What she does, she puts her stick down and she says, 'Let the children come.' And all of the children rush from the perimeter of the clearing into the center, and she says, 'Let your parents hear you laugh.' And the woods ring out with laughter, and maybe the adults look on and they can't help but smile too. Then she says, 'Let the grown men come.' And one by one, the men start to come out from the trees. She says, 'Let your wives see you dance.' And the men start to dance. And maybe the ground comes awake beneath their feet. And finally, she calls the women to the center, and they all come, and she says, 'Cry. For the living and the dead, just cry.' And the women let loose and begin to weep. And Morrison writes that it started that way, with the children laughing and the men dancing and the women crying, until the men stopped dancing and cried. And the women started to dance, and the children laughed, and women cried, and they all got kind of tangled up in each other until eventually, exhausted, they collapse in this clearing, panting for breath. And it's into this, after this embodied, emotional, intergenerational spiritual practice. It's into that moment that Baby Suggs, the book's matriarch, offers them a sermon. And Morrison's very clear. She says, Baby Suggs, she doesn't give that traditional gospel message. She doesn't tell these people to go and sin no more. Instead, she tells them this: in this here place, we flesh that weeps, laughs, flesh that dances on bare feet in grass, love it. She says, yonder, they don't love your flesh, they despise it. And they don't love your eyes, they just as soon pick them out. No more do they love the skin on your back, yonder they flay it. And oh my people, they do not love your hands. Those they only use, tie, bind, chop off, and leave empty. She says, love your hands, pat them together, stroke them on your face, because they don't love that either. She says, this is flesh I'm talking about here. Flesh that needs to be loved, feet that need to rest, strong arms. She says, oh, my people, out yonder, they do not love your neck, unnoosed and straight. So love your neck, stroke it, hold it up. She says, in all the inside parts that they just assume slop for hogs, and the dark, dark liver, the beating heart. She says, this is the prize. So what is at stake in a disembodied life? In recent years, there's been a notable increase in the call to pay attention to our bodies, often in digital spaces. You see this, if you're on social media, you'll see this a lot amongst wellness influencers and the vacuum that is self-care propaganda at the moment. You'll hear things like, listen to your body, rest, take care of yourself. The message, often valid and necessary, but the why and the how have become, in my opinion, cheapened by a society that equates caring for the body with like bath bombs and going on luxury vacations, which there's nothing wrong with those things. I love a vacation, but I begin at the site of the clearing because I want to be clear. When I speak about protecting the body in these times, I don't mean those practices that feed the kind of capitalist machine of buy, get, nor do I mean the diluted form of attunement that's more about often numbing the cry of body than actually listening to it. I'm talking about the clearing. I'm talking the raw, earthy, desperate, intergenerational, deeply enfleshed dignity of our bodies in the physical world around us. And the clearing that Morrison has offered up in Beloved reminds us that to survive, we must locate a spirituality that has just as much to do with the corporeal, with the physical, as it does with the invisible, or one's interior life. So this is my belief. It's not unique to me. The physical is the spiritual. I don't think they can be divorced from one another. I think any disconnect is of our society's doing. I think it's a strategic reprogramming, for lack of a better word. So our society, rife with exhaustion, enslaved by capitalism, addicted to technology, and ill-equipped to care for the traumatized, is perpetually training us toward a different path. So endless cues of self-hatred, of hatred of the body, we receive from the time we're little. You've heard things like, rub some dirt in it, mind over matter, even never give up, which, all of these can be perceived as these messages of integrity, when I know we all have known what it is to have given far too much, to have asked far too much of our bodies. And in the moment, it is not the voice of stillness, of self-compassion that rises to meet us, but it's these mantras, violent mantras in the end, because they communicate that it is somehow better, that it is somehow more honorable for us to forget our bodies, usually so that we can produce more for a society that does not care about them. And more recently, AI and other technologies have been exalted as some kind of futuristic savior, some kind of eternal help guide, when in actuality we know it to be just another avenue for bias and violence against bodies that look like mine, when we know it to be yet another contribution in our endless mission to degrade the earth and abuse our resources, when we know it to be held together by the hidden labor of humans in the globally excluded populations in the globally excluded South. Digital spaces have become, just another collaboration, really, of tools that sever us from the physical, including our own flesh. So if you hear little else as I speak today, I'd want you to hear this, something I've been telling myself for the past 3 or 4 years now. If you aren't in your body, someone else is. If you aren't in your body, someone else is. Morrison writes, love your neck. They do not love to see it unnoosed and straight. And with every call that the matriarch gives us to kind of love the flesh, she reminds us of what's lurking beyond the clearing, which is a world that does not care about Black bodies, disabled bodies, bodies disinterested in being ground up and sacrificed on our altars of productivity and utility. And the call to stay in your body begins to ring a little more urgent when you realize that to be absent from the body is not like departing and just leaving the self alone. If you aren't in your body, someone else is, which is to say it's not a void, it's an open door. For capitalism, for misogyny, anti-Blackness, the church, there are systems that have everything to gain from our disembodiment because emptied bodies are easier to use. So we're going to talk some about the cost of the digital realm on our bodies. We'll talk about the cost on our land and our sensory worlds. And finally, if I have time, I'll speak to you as a poet. We'll talk about the cost on our art, which is, after all, a bodily endeavor. But hopefully I'll get to that. If you aren't familiar with my work, my writing first gained public notice with a digital project called Black Liturgies, which eventually became a book. But I began the digital project in the summer of 2020, which is the first summer of the pandemic and lockdown, and was in the wake of the very publicized murders of Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd, and we had the resurfacing of the murders of Breonna Taylor and Elijah McClain. And I was looking to survive. I was looking to, as Baldwin put it, I was looking for a way to vomit the anguish up, the rage, the anguish, the cynicism. And that's really how Black Liturgies was born, and I began sharing excerpts and quotations from Black literature and coupling it with prayer or a breath practice or some thoughts of my own. And it's really a space where my story as Black, as queer, as woman, as writer, and as spiritual all together kind of came alive in this exploration of Black emotion, the Black body, and Black literature. And it makes sense for my story and for my identities, although the medium I chose, I feel some degree of tension around. But in its best days, it has brought me some manner of survival, company on the journey, and it also has brought me equal death. I have holes in my eyes. I write about it in my first book. My retinas, they're like always littered with tears and thinning places, like lace, my retina surgeon tells me. Because of this and a number of other eye conditions, including convergence insufficiency, which is more common, just means your eyes don't work in collaboration with each other anymore. But because of this, I'm very sensitive to light. It creates a kind of pain behind my eye and this pressure as if my eyes are being pushed outward. And it can make it hard for my eyes to work together to really focus on a face or on writing. This is a curse to one who has chosen to run a digital project that tethered her to the blue light of a phone screen for hours a day. And at first I did what I had done all my life. I pushed through it. I willed myself to forget the pain and committed myself to sharing once a day. I did so for about a year, gained over 100,000 followers, and really didn't miss most days. From 10 to 12:30, I would like hunch over the glow, the glow designed to entrap me, and post and comment and share and ignore the pain. And then I'd look up, around lunchtime and everything was blurry and I'd have to wear sunglasses indoors for the rest of the day. This is how it was until the day my neurooptometrist told me my pupils were troubling her. She said biggest she'd seen prior to manual dilation, and when she shone a light on them, they'd contract for a second and then kind of pucker out as if they were slumping. She placed her fists together in that meeting. She says, "This is where your eyes are, and we need to find some way to bring them back to center." And that was the day I learned that my eyes reveal that my sympathetic nervous system, which triggers things like fight or flight stress responses, is overactive, and as if I'm encountering a threat at all times. And my parasympathetic nervous system, which is meant to guide us into rest and relaxation, is being suppressed and drowned out. And the eyes, these were all biological responses to help you survive a threat. Evolutionarily speaking, it's quite beneficial if your eyes then take in more of your periphery in the presence of a threat. The issue is when your body remains in fight or flight long after that threat has subsided. So I'm left with, giant pupils and my vision drifting outward and feeling terribly anxious under the bright lights of a grocery store or driving at night. Before Black Liturgies, I wasn't really on social media. I only followed friends and family, the world in which people followed, like influencers hadn't quite taken off yet, nor did I understand that there were creatives on the app that I could follow. And I was suspicious of social media and largely have remained so, as it was not designed with my interests in mind, but the interests and appetites of rich white men. But through it, I've seen the beauty of the digital realm. I've admitted this much from time to time, but I've also been confirmed in my suspicions that without adequate awareness, social media steals not only our relationships, not only our imaginations, but it steals our bodies. And the tech gods have spared no resource and no amount of ingenuity in order to keep us tethered to that glow. But it's an issue that has been spoken of so much and so often that it's begun to mean nothing at all. I feel like when you say the same word over and over again and it stops to sound like that word, that's how I sound when I try to talk to my peers, my friends, people younger than me. It's begun to mean nothing. And as Christians and spiritual people, Christians if you are one, who have long been trained in disembodiment, it is increasingly difficult to detect. So I find it so fascinating that for a faith that in its holy text puts so much emphasis on the body, many of us, if not all, have been trained to neglect it. These are the stories that hold together the Christian traditions. You have a God who walks in a garden with his creation, a garden. You have shame's entrance into the world at the sight of Adam and Eve's body. You have, this is my body, this is my blood, if you belong to a Eucharistic tradition. We have God born into the body of a woman. If you believe that Mary is the mother of Christ, you believe that God put their faith in the body of a woman in order to survive. Those are the stories, you know? That's the text, and it beats blood. You know, that God would drink from the breasts of their creation. It's deeply bodily. And yet, many Christians have been trained in a disembodied faith, or at least a faith whose loudest demand seems to be to sacrifice one's body. So how many times will this be said? Maybe you've heard it around Good Friday. You'll hear, God endured so much violence on the cross. He endured it all, gave everything. What will you give? Will you sacrifice it all? You know, very sinister stuff. As if to say, because Christ endured violence in the body, our ambition should be to somehow mirror that and survive that terror ourselves. We are taught to sacrifice our bodies for God far more than we are taught to lie down by still waters, to eat and rest in the valley of the shadow of death. You know, and we've erected this delusion that the important things are the invisible things, which is but one reason that the digital realm has retained such a hold over spiritually minded beings. We've long been trained in abandoning the body, so we hardly sense it. We hardly sense it in our technology. But our task, I think, is to resist this formation. We resist and take hold of the inherent beauty and dignity of the physical, though it's not an easy task in a traumatized world. So I want to talk for a bit about trauma in the body, because I think our tech advancements increasingly exploit our traumas to become more effective at their aims. So we have to talk about trauma and the way it inclines us toward not only escaping the world, but escaping the body, escaping our physical realities. So a lot of research has been done around the body and trauma. Not my research. I'm a lay learner, but you know, we've learned how shame rests on a person's body to transform their posture over time. We've learned how trauma affects our habits toward bodily neglect and care. We've long understood the biological response of dissociating from the body in the immediacy of trauma. But more and more research is being released on the long-term and even inherited effects of traumatic experiences on a person's body. This is from Hungarian physician and author Gabor Maté, who writes, "In the absence of relief, a young person's natural response, their only response really, is to repress and disconnect from the feeling states associated with suffering. One no longer knows one's body. Oddly, this self-estrangement can show up later in life in the form of an apparent strength, such as my ability to perform at a high level when hungry or stressed or fatigued, pushing on without awareness of my need for pause, nutrition, or rest." I'm sure that sounds familiar to at least some of you in this room. I heard there's some pastors in here. Trauma in all its forms trains us toward disembodiment, dissociation, right? In the immediacy of trauma, this is actually a biological mercy. There are times when leaving the body is a kind of salvation and a way for the body to distance itself from a present terror. But our task is to not become overly familiar with the disembodied existence, because habitual disembodiment is not a mercy, but a prison. Now, this research on trauma in the body has begun to extend into research concerning racial trauma. So what are the stories we inherit? You know, our bodies are a site of intergenerational story, of intergenerational trauma and healing, and how do the stories we inherit live in the body today? As a Black woman in America, I'm sure you can understand why that question is vital for me. I have inherited a story of grave violence neglect of the Black body, perpetual dismissal and alienation of the Black body throughout American history. And from the time I was a little girl, I learned to divorce myself from my body in order to survive this. By the way, this isn't unique to me. For many people of color, for many queer people, trans people, other oppressed groups, we have had, on some level, to forget our bodies, because to remember them is to subject oneself to the daily violence that the world heaps on us and their actions, beliefs, policies, and language. This time from author Ta-Nehisi Coates, Black author, in his book Between the World and Me, he says, "But all our phrasing, race relations, racial chasm, racial justice, racial profiling, white privilege, even white supremacy, serves to obscure that racism is a visceral experience, that it dislodges brains, blocks airways, rips muscle, extracts organs, cracks bones, breaks teeth. You must never look away from this. You must always remember that the sociology, the history, the economics, the graphs, the charts, the regressions, all land with great violence upon the body." And I'll say this, every digital space lands heavily on our bodies. Even those technologies which are meant to promote health and well-being and safety can be distorted to serve as just another arm for the prejudice and anti-Blackness of the world. What is seen and marketed as mere convenience has physical implications in the bodies of the real. The biases woven into AI systems in the medical field and law enforcement, for example, reveal that our technologies are, in the end, products of a society that has failed to comprehend the dignity of each of its members. AI, I don't mean to single it out as a technology, but it is maintained and serviced and refined, not by some bodiless genius algorithm, as tech giants would have you believe, but in actuality, they exist because of the labor, often underpaid labor, of the global South and globally exploited countries. Adio Daninka, she's a research fellow at the Distributed Artificial Intelligence Research Institute, writes, "The illusion of AI capability is often maintained at the cost of hidden human labor." She goes on to write, "The glossy veneer of the tech industry conceals a raw human reality that spans the globe, from the outskirts of Nairobi to the crowded apartments of Manila, to Syrian refugee communities in Lebanon. A vast network of unseen workers power our digital world. The stories of these workers are often a tapestry of trauma, exploitation, and resilience, ones that reveal the true cost of our AI-driven future." The digital realm, it is never bodily neutral. It's never body neutral. And we will only survive it, I think, by becoming those capable of habitually reclaiming our bodies, by holding a spirituality that demands allegiance to the flesh. And of course, by retaining a spirituality that cares not just about our own flesh, but about the physical realm and all. So, can we talk about the land for a moment? When I speak of the body, I speak of the sensory, and the body and the land, they can't be divorced from one another either. They are physical realities that shape our interior worlds. Despite many of us belonging to spiritual traditions which profess care and stewardship of the land, we have been trained to view the earth as something to be ruled and tamed, far more than we have been formed in nurture and cultivation. This is not far from the heart of the colonizer, by the way. Any attempt to tame the indigenous body, brought with it first the desire to tame the land. Prentice Hemphill, who's a therapist, an embodiment practitioner, and the author of a book called What It Takes to Heal, in which they say, "Humans decided to conquer nature, no longer living as a part of it or attuned to it, but becoming masters of it. Just as the mind was split from the body, we were split from feeling and ranked according to our association with the untamed world. If we treat our bodies like machines, as if they are only containers for our thinking, then our emotions in their unpredictability become the wild, in need of conquering too. Which, they're getting into something much more profound about the body and emotional integrity and that connection, but through the lens of the land. As if to say, the same impulse in us that seeks to subjugate a human exists in our relationship to the land that wants to demand and abuse and exploit the land. It's the same impulse. Here's a terrifying fact I learned this week, and I learned it from social media. A link to an article. The Washington Post worked with researchers at the University of California, Riverside, I believe, to try to figure out how much water and power OpenAI's ChatGPT uses. And they estimate that to write the average 100-word response to a query, OpenAI's ChatGPT requires about 519 milliliters of water. Wild, right? A little more than one bottle of water. But if everyone's doing that once a week even, the article cited this lengthy court battle in the Dalles, which is a port city outside of Oregon, and which, through this court petition, Google was finally forced to disclose how much water its data centers were using in the area. It turned out to be nearly a quarter of all water available in that town. That's what the documents revealed. Everything has a cost. Dr. Herzfeld earlier, I can't remember exactly what you said, but you said it takes something. All technology gives something and it takes something. Everything has a cost. It's whether we know it or not, whether we've been informed on it or not. Now, why is this urgent? Why this strange kind of meandering talk about the physical and the digital? Especially when I myself have carved out a corner of the digital realm for just about 500,000 followers, 500,000 bodies that I've dragged into further into this with me. This is not where I give you, some pep talk about the beauty of technology. There are many of those talks. I encourage you to look them up. But this is where I tell you, we will not escape the increasingly powerful tide of digital spaces. I can't even park without a smartphone. I don't have a smartphone, and so I have to borrow my husband's smartphone on trips such as this so I can guarantee I can pay to park. We won't escape it. But our responsibility as humans is to stay more human than the machines which slowly dominate us. And we should be wary of any formation that aids in our pre-existing determination to erase the body, to erase the Black body, the queer body, the poor body. And we must locate a spirituality that fiercely defends the physical, knowing very real physical threats lurk beyond the clearing. Now, I tend to be hesitant to invoke George Floyd's name in spaces like this. I worry that we're very quickly reducing him to a symbol, and I think his name is wielded to feed all kinds of emotional emptiness, and I don't want to do that, but I want to talk about a man named Donald Williams. Donald Williams testified in the trial against Derek Chauvin being the man who murdered George Floyd. Donald Williams is the man who you can hear in the video of the incident pleading with the officers to stop. So Donald Williams takes the stand, and the defense attorneys spend a great deal of time attempting to imply that Williams was in the way, that he was distracting, that he was disrespectful, that he's somehow culpable, whatever. At one point, Donald Williams on the stand, you can watch this on YouTube or whatever, on the stand, he looks up and he just says, "No, I stayed in my body. You can't paint me out to be some angry black man. I stayed in my body. And I think about that. What terrible and beautiful defiance, refusing to be reduced, refusing to only see the incident through a screen. In protection of another man, I stayed in my body. In a world where we are forced to march to rallying cries of I can't breathe, where we are forced to hear black men and women and non-binary people cry out for their makers and their moms, with their final words being I can't breathe. What does it actually mean to reclaim the body, to reclaim the breath? This is not just wellness, like self-help fluff. This is profound defiance, profound resistance for those of us whose collective breath has been stolen, whose bodies have been degraded. When I pause to practice breath practice, it's part of my own spiritual formation. I do so for my grandma, my great-grandma, as a reminder that maybe my breath is worthy to be nurtured. Maybe it carries wisdom. When I lie down to rest, I do so for my ancestors who couldn't, who didn't have agency in the body. And I have a strong suspicion that much of the resistance to embodied spirituality and white-dominated spaces is born of a deep shame of the brutalities that white bodies have wrought. I think whiteness knows on some plane of the soul what it has done to bodies like mine, and to attune to the physical is to become present to the very physical terrors we and our ancestors have enacted. So what I mean to say is our relationship to our bodies, to our own faces, is a story that stretches back long before we were born. And it's a costly journey back, but it's necessary. I say, like, if you've ever tripped on the sidewalk or gotten injured playing a sport or like burned in the kitchen, and you've had that moment where you look down and it's not until you actually see the wound that you feel the pain, not until you see the burn that you feel it. I think, this attunement to our physical selves is often what helps us to point to where it hurts and sense things about ourselves and our predicaments that we wouldn't ordinarily sense. And I don't need to tell you that there are people who want anything but that. People who absolutely benefit from our numbness. So time and time again, I'm reminded that this fidelity to the body is not extraneous to the spiritual life. It's central. It's primary. Okay, we have time. So I want to speak to you as an artist, which, as I said before, is in fact a bodily endeavor. Good art requires blood. And any AI-generated art which feels soulful and real is only because it has, learned and to some degree co-opted and dissected the soul and realness of a human artist somewhere. That's just the way it works. Their training. A few months ago, I came across an image of James Baldwin that I had never seen before. And I've seen a lot of photos of him, but he was older than I'd ever seen him and slouched in this tall, like antique throne-like chair. And it was striking. And, for a moment, a few moments, even beautiful, until some maybe bodily knowledge occurred to me, and all of a sudden I knew it wasn't him. In the comments of the post, I discovered it was AI generated. And any beauty that remained turned into a kind of betrayal. Betrayal not only in the failure to disclose it as such, but in the sense that a black man's body, one whom I admired and who in his lifetime took great care to have agency over his physical, self, had once again been taken, contorted, used without consent in the aims of another, even if those aims were for, art's end or however it can be justified. James Baldwin in this photo, he might look stoic and enchanting, is sitting on this throne chair with some extra wrinkles in his head and some creases on his eyes, but the truth is he died when he died. And he never sat in that chair. And in fact, his shoulders rarely arched that way. And perhaps he never even laid eyes on a shirt even remotely resembling the one that the AI model had generated for him to wear. I'm not impressed. I mean, I have friends who are artists that use AI, I should say, but I tell them I'm not impressed, because it occurred to me then that we no longer own our own faces, and perhaps that some of us never have. And this should trouble us. You know, I used to think art would save us. I used to write it on books I would sign for, the poets and the painters that came through my life, art, but not all art will save us. I think some means to destroy us, and, at the risk of sounding alarmist, I believe we have to resist. 3 quotes, Amiri Baraka. I'll give you 2 since I've given you so many quotations. These are all by artists. He says, the artist's role is to raise the consciousness of the people, to make them understand life, the world, and themselves more completely. Otherwise, I don't see why you do it. Nikki Finney, she says, my responsibility as a poet, as an artist, is to not look away. And finally, James Baldwin says, kind of famously, all art is a kind of confession, more or less oblique. And he says, all artists, if they are to survive, are forced at last to vomit the anguish up, to tell the whole story. And do you hear that in each of those assumptions? Do you hear that? The physical demand, the physical allegiance embedded in a physical earthly reality. As spiritual folk, if you are one, we have often conflated artistry, much like salvation, with some immaterial, flowery language of the soul. It's imprecise enough that we like to kind of just leave it at that, when in truth, art is only ever a product of a physical reality, and it requires that particular brand of knowledge which I think exists in the body far prior to existing cognitively. Like what artists know, they know it in the bone, they know it at the blood. And as artists, which if you are spiritual, I consider you an artist, we must protect this. So I want to close by reading a poem that could only be born of a soul. It's a part of a poem that's become a bit of a ritual for me when I'm trying to defy my own disembodiment. It is from Country of Water by a Black poet named Mahogany L. Brown. She says, I know who I am because I believe it. The breath in my chest, insistent in its choice. The skin that I'm in, the bones and blood and veins it carries like a promise. Have you witnessed the ocean? Moving with so much gust and life. Have you witnessed the river? Still waters bubbling, the rebirth of school. Have you witnessed your body? Its own country of water, moving against the tide of a world so heartbreaking, it's forgotten its own voice. What does it mean to stay in our bodies? We are tired. There are people in this room who are in a pain in their bodies that they don't even have the language for. There are people in this room that wake with an interior fatigue that feels relentless. The answer is not dislocation, but abiding presence. Stay near to yourselves, your whole selves. I asked in the beginning, what is at stake in a disembodied life? And I think no less than our complete and collective liberation. Thank you. Thank you. We have time for some Q&A. It's 2:30. So what questions are in the room? What thoughts, critiques? Are there any?
Hi, thank you so very much. I'm thinking back to our creation stories and wondering, do you see any artist's heart flowing through a desire to create through AI? But I'm also reading you know, giving humanity dominion over or ruling over. And then part of me is also like, is this just another instinct to have something else to rule over or have dominion over? So just speaking to kind of, could there be an artist, a co-creator, so to speak, tendency here, or is this humanity and we're just trying to get
I,
something else to?
so I've softened on it depends on the day you ask me. I've softened on this a bit. I can think of one artist who I admire greatly. Her name is Natalie Lauren Sims. She's amazing. And in recent years, she's been dabbling in AI aided artistry. It's really beautiful and troubling. And it's a tension I feel like I'm always in with my friends. We're always trying to determine like how much of this can we use and how much will destroy us before we can have the chance to use it. I think today, ask me again in 5 years, I think maybe it's possible that the right person, the right artist, like this woman, Natalie, I trust her. Yeah, I trust her deeply. I think the right person, grounded enough in their own interior world and aware of the implications on the physical world, probably can create beautiful work in tandem, in collaboration with AI. I want to leave room for that possibility. I am particularly skeptical of any attempts to use it that require you training AI and on a bunch of people who haven't consented, training them on their work, on their writing, on their painting, whatever, what have you. We had this big kind of lawsuit of writers semi-recently saying we don't want ChatGPT to have access to our manuscripts. We didn't get paid for this. We didn't sign off for this. So I'm increasingly skeptical of that, but I have an imagination for a kind of more equitable use where people are compensated for that training, and then maybe other artists use that to create something beautiful. Yeah, standalone AI art where you just plug in James Baldwin, old, on the throne. I'm not interested in that. Yeah.
I have a quick question about responding. I'm over here, brother. Sorry.
Oh, hi.
Responding to like utopian thinking that I think some people come to AI and generative AI to the idea that it can be a tool, I think, like we're talking about, for creativity that can lead us away and against the systems that we kind of are having to work through now. And weirdly, I got to thinking about it by talking about with my grandfather, who's in his late 80s, and he's always reading the news and always telling me what he's excited about. And when he graduated with an engineering degree in the 50s, he couldn't get a job in Texas. He grew up, his family had been in South Texas for hundreds of years, and he was the first person in his family to receive a college degree, and he couldn't get a job here. He had to move to DC to work for the federal government, start his career there, and was able to come back to Texas eventually. And I think the way he approached it was the idea that you no longer have to include a picture of yourself on your application. You have this platform that presumably enables a level playing field, or presumably a post-racial environment within which to operate and have tools available to everyone. We talked earlier about students who don't speak English as their first language, having this be a tool to enable them to refine their writing so that it would be palatable for someone who wants it to sound like someone who speaks English as a first language. I guess it's, how do we respond to that, I think, utopian impulse that some people have of the idea that we have this ultimate tool that will bring us to this center together, when in reality it gives us the opportunity to avoid our like decentered, embodied nature.
Yeah. I mean, I think first we should respond with compassion, of course, which you sound like a compassionate individual. when you were speaking about your family, because there's, I mean, I never want to be someone who's so quick to critique someone else's source of hope. You know, if you've been able to locate something in this, you know, mess, then I'm not quick to try to steal that. But I think we should refine it with more honesty, and ask more questions of it to say, you know, whose utopia and whose erasure does that utopia require? And it's complicated. That's not to say that, you know, students shouldn't use, you know, those technologies in order to seem more palatable. We use what we have in order to get by. But we need to ask the question, why? Why is that required of them? Why do they need to be made palatable in order to be taken seriously as academics or what have you? Why do they need to be made palatable to kind of white Western dialects? And my fear is if we just pursue some utopia where, you know, no one's an outsider, even playing field, one, it won't really be, because at the end of the day, someone owns these technologies, all of them, and will continue to profit off of them and use them however they want. But also, it is eliminating that kind of impulse. What's that quote by, I think it's Asada Shakur. She says, like, the more used you become to your own chains, the easier it is to forget them, which sounds like a kind of grand thing, a grand response to your question. But I think there's something sincerely related in that if we're so prone to, you know, achieving the utopia, we can skip past the very real present demands on a person of unjust causes in the now. Because we're thinking, oh, but if I do this, if I do that, let's eliminate it. But why? Why do we need uniformity, you know? Yeah. I don't know.
Oh, hi. It's on. Thank you. I'm curious if you can share, if you're comfortable, any body practices that you have that that you would share with us.
Sure. A lot of I didn't speak about this too much. I spoke about my eyes, but I also live with chronic illness and have since I was 26. And so there was a time where my kind of embodiment practice looked like dance and stretching and what have you. And in different seasons, I'm still able to do that some, but mostly it's become overly simplified, you know, just bare bones connecting with my physical. I have the ability to not eat until 6 p.m. without noticing. And I used to be proud of that, you know, that work ethic, but now it deeply disturbs me. So I've learned that reprogramming, for lack of a better language, it's too much to resist on any individual basis. I think I myself am not going to resist the tide of disembodiment woven into our structures and systems. So I think, what can I do? I set a lot of alarms. Like, if you looked, I have my husband's phone, but if you looked at my phone, my dumb phone, it does have alarm capacities. I set an alarm every 20 minutes while I'm writing. Something as simple as that. The science says you should look up from your computer screen for 20 seconds every 20 minutes, 20 feet away for your eye health. I would like to say that I'm attuned enough to my body that I just do that. The reality is no, I don't. After, you know, years of doing talks such as this, I still need an alarm to remind me. I set alarms to drink water, alarms to eat, alarms to breathe, all of it. And I do that with compassion on myself instead of kind of like yelling at myself to like do more, do these formative practices. Why aren't you sleeping more? I now have realized it's just too much for anyone to resist on their own. This isn't a practice, but I also think good community can take you there. Like if you have, I happen to have located I have a small number of friends, but they're friends who are so disinterested in me using my body for money, they don't care that I've written 2 books that have done quite well in the world. They want to know, like, did I eat lunch today? You know, how much water have you drank? And those kind of people, surrounding yourself with the right company that gives you permission in some ways to access the physical, I think is invaluable. Yeah.
So I think in some communities, some groups, they're ready for this language of talking about being in your body. But then there's other groups where that's not going to be their focus and they're not interested in that kind of language. And so as I lead in a church, lead a women's Bible study, do you have any thoughts on just little bitty things that I could make part of our practice together that would encourage people in that direction, especially in a group that does have a lot of trauma?
I mean, I think it probably differs depending on the intimacy of the group, but I've seen it done really well in kind of small group settings when a leader, instead of the like just general, how are you when you go around the circle and share, I've seen it practiced in a way where they ask maybe more targeted questions. How does your body feel today? Does it feel a little bit weird to hear that for the first time? Yeah, it's a bit weird. It was weird to me, and I believe in embodiment. But I think slowly it becomes, very quickly, I think it becomes not weird when you think, oh yeah, actually, my hand tremor is a little bit worse today, or I'm feeling this pain. I think that's worth something. I think breath practice, I mean, I'm biased because I wrote a book kind of littered with breathing exercises, but I think breath practice is really accessible and really particularly beautiful in these times when we're still surviving a pandemic that kind of alienated us from our own breath and body. Like, I think to practice shared breathing together can be kind of redemptive, again, if the group feels comfortable with that. But I've learned to just be patient. There was a time where I was kind of participating in the chorus of people running around being like, listen to your bodies, go to sleep, and it took time and really me becoming sick to realize, how naive that was at times, that you're asking something serious. If you're going to ask someone to attune to the body, you better be prepared to offer meaningful care in the wake of that attunement. Once a disabled person does begin to feel that ache in their lower back, can you offer something? Can you space out the chairs further, so that everyone feels more at ease? Yeah. Anyways, thank you for that question.
This may be a very personal question, and you have every bit of permission to say, no, I don't want to answer this.
Thank you.
You kind of leaned into this a little bit with the response you just gave. For those of us with disabled bodies, I have found it difficult to put words or to want to be embodied because that disassociation sometimes allows you to go somewhere else. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious, in dealing with trying to be more in your own body when your body fights you, how to get over some of that frustration or deal with that internal dialogue that's kind of happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for that question. I mean, I'm learning this with you. Like, patience is everything, and I think this idea that we have to do it all at once and that listening to the body means you're aware of every ache and kind of creak, I think it's just insincere. I think it's impossible to truly be attuned to, pain at every level. And I think the kind of reduction of embodiment in social media spaces or in influencers maybe has reduced listen to the body as listen for the pain, listen for the hunger, all valid. But there are other things to listen for, that I think as disabled people we can listen for that isn't out of deficiency, that isn't out of need or lack, but it's out of beauty. Yeah, I don't know how helpful an example would be in my own body because it will feel so strange to you all, to experience that in your bodies. But there have been times where that listening to my body has led me to marvel at my body just as often as it's led me to realize I'm in a whole lot of pain today and I'm not doing so hot. I think we need to have an imagination for both and a practice of both, especially as disabled people. As for those times where we distance ourselves from our body just because of the sheer weight of it, I really don't think anyone else can tell you or measure for you when to kind of enter and exit that need. I think it is truly a biological mercy. The spiritualist in me wants to believe it's a kind of cosmic, divine biological mercy that we are on some level able to distance the mind from the body. I like to believe, that God kind of designed that science beautifully, and we shouldn't be so quick to reject it. For myself, though, I want to make sure that when the time comes, when the hour comes, and I'm sitting in a particular group of people who don't mean my body well, I'm at least dialed in enough to be able to kind of notice that, to be tipped off to I'm not safe, or I need something, or there's actually beauty here when other people mean to diminish your body in this way. Yeah, that's a very long answer to your question. I feel like we could probably talk for a while. Yeah. I saw a hand up.
Yeah, you mentioned about how you can respond to people when they describe what's happening with their bodies. And what you described is people being together in the same space. But often you may ask that question when you're on Zoom. Mm-hmm. So what do you say, when someone describes what's happening with their body, they're being honest, when you cannot add comfort, that is physical comfort right there? What might you say?
Oh, I don't know what I would say. I want to know what you would say. You seem like you've thought about this. I think across digital spaces, it's interesting because there's something. Well, I'll just take Zoom, for example. The terror of having to sit in front of your own face for an hour and a half in a meeting. Like, who thought of this? And you would think that then would lead us into some kind of deeper encounter with our bodies, our flesh. But we know that that's not what happens. I get off a Zoom call, my shoulders hurt because I've been clenching and examining every face I'm making and critiquing it. I think to some extent in digital spaces, there can be a relief of not having to constantly be mindful of the flesh. I think about, it's a little bit of my trauma speaking, I think about those sacred times when a leader has said, you turn off your cameras. And it's so counterintuitive because you think, no, we should witness each other's bodies to really be together. But that turn off each other's cameras prior to meditation or something has been truly, there are some people in this room who will this resonate with. It's liberating to just be able to relax and not be made spectacle. I think for those of us who know what it is to have our bodies be made spectacle, the digital space can be a tremendous relief, in that way, if we give people permission to do what they need to in that space. I know there's probably lots of ways to answer your question, though.
I don't know. I usually breathe and encourage others to breathe as well.
Yeah, I think that's great.
What about counting bodies? Now, as church members, disciple people, we count a lot of bodies. And we also wonder why these bodies show up. We ask those kinds of questions. But in a time now where we're talking a lot about discipleship, but people are not showing up. So bodies are not occupying the spaces. I worship at a place where it may be a quarter filled. We've got too much space now. So what do you think about counting bodies and evaluating what's going on based on the bodies that showed up?
This is a very, my generation thing to say, I'm a millennial, I'm 34, I feel like there's kind of largely this rejection of counting numbers, and so I'm aware of that kind of bias in me away from the need to count. I'm much more interested in the number of stories in a room than the number of bodies. But there's the practical part of my brain that's but Cole, you need humans in a space. So I don't know. I think it's always worth interrogating whose bodies feel welcome in a space. And I don't mean that just in the, racial sense or anything like that. I mean that literally whose bodies, if the only seating you have available, if there's any youth group leaders, I'm thinking about this youth group context that I was in recently, the only seating was couches. And I thought that might seem comfortable to some, but for some that's terrifying, you know. Not just for the pain of getting out of a couch sometimes, but also because you have to be in proximity to someone else's body who you don't know them. I don't know if I want to touch you. I don't know if I'm safe with you. So I think, you know, if we can't, I mean, we obviously can't force numbers to swell, but I think we can always ask ourselves, like, whose bodies are feeling comfortable, whose bodies wouldn't, you know, and how can I diversify the options in a space to make it more hospitable to different bodies. But yeah, again, I'm biased. Stories over numbers. Yeah.
Right here.
Thank you so much for your talk. I'm not normally a question asker, but I was wondering, you kind of touched on this with the Zoom question, but for some people, online spaces like are the only space where they can find community, right? Like I'm thinking of I lead a group of mostly queer college students, and like online communities like saved them when they were in high school because they grew up in these little towns in Texas where they were not accepted. I'm wondering like how you personally, or like, I don't know, what advice you have for like the nuance there, like engaging with social media, but also like the very real pain. And I don't know, you said something about like it helped you survive, it also like caused death.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, I wish I would have said more about the survival part, thinking back on it, because it really did. And I mean, not far from your reasoning, I think I live in Ithaca, New York, which it's a beautiful, progressive town, but I think what I was looking for that summer, the summer of 2020, was just really like a dozen or so other Black women who cared about liturgy, cared about a spiritual practice, but wasn't willing to sacrifice their Blackness to belong to a spiritual space. And Ithaca is very white. And I'd benefited from, you know, those spiritual spaces, and I'd been harmed by them. And in Black liturgies brought me in closer community with the people that I long to be, and has absolutely sustained me. I would have been the first to say, you know, pre-social media, Cole, that social media, like, don't trust it. Any community is just, it's superficial. I haven't found that to be the case. I'm certain there are superficial, you know, online communities, but I feel very privileged to have found some piece of realness in people, either in DMs or, you know, on Patreon. So I think it is possible. And it's for that reason, and kind of the shared knowledge, I think. Well, this will get us down a different subject, but I think in a time where like our news sources are increasingly questioned, and you know, AI to a certain extent has some culpability here. I think it's becoming harder and harder to discern what's real and what's not for people. And I think to kind of have this democratization or this kind of shared collective voice by a lot of people, it can have some bad side effects, but can have some really beautiful, you know, effects too, where you encounter a different viewpoint or a story that's maybe closer to like what used to be writing a letter to someone, as opposed to like getting your information on high and then having to discern like what of this is real and what's not. I don't know if that makes sense, but for all that reason, I don't think I'll ever again completely condemn social media and digital communities. I mean, how can I? I'm, you know, trying my best to be a part of one. Mm-hmm.
Time for one more? Okay, last question. Did I see a hand? Right there. Thank you.
Hi, this is a practical question, but also personal. Could you describe some of the indicators that you feel when you know you're not connected to your body, like things that help you go, okay, I need to check in on myself here?
It's beautiful when people can recognize it in the moment. I'll say for me personally, it tends to happen after the fact, in retrospect, sadly. I mean, the more you practice it, I'm sure the more accessible it becomes. But I'll leave a space and I'll find that my shoulder hurts, or I notice some pain somewhere. I'm chronically ill, so my notice has to do with a lot of pain sensations. But I'll realize I hadn't recognized it prior to leaving or departing that space, and it's because my brain kind of had to numb that in order to get through something. So I think afterwards, presence to all kinds of sensations and feelings are helpful. I think if you're someone who, again, this isn't, I don't want to like diagnose anyone. This isn't like diagnostic criteria. It's just ideas of what might mean you're kind of living disembodied. But if you find yourself like clenching your jaw, if you find yourself short of breath often, I mean, of course, that can be a really physical reality, but it also can mean there's some level of anxiety or story that's surfacing in your body that maybe you've ignored. I think people who forget to eat, which is many of us, we should always question that. I think something deeply mysterious and a little bit sinister is happening if you're forgetting a meal time. Not that every culture has their own structures around mealtime, but like you should have some awareness of like when your body needs nutrition. That's a pretty good signal for me when I like look up and I haven't drank all day. That something probably is amiss, even if I feel like I'm doing good work. Yeah. I think it really is a collective kind of coordinate effort. I think other people can recognize it in me as well. Once they have attuned to my body long enough, they can kind of sense, that I'm not fully present in a space. And I think that can be beautiful and helpful. And we're so used to it ourselves, someone to kind of slow us down. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you, Cole. We've been talking about this for 4 or 5 years, so it is a joy, a deep joy, to have you here with us at Perkins. Thank you. Thank you for sharing your bodies with us in this space, and your minds, and your hearts, and your hospitality, and your friendship. It's our hope that as you leave this space, the things that have challenged you, the things that have encouraged you will carry on to the people you love and the communities that you serve as you take these conversations and have new conversations about what you've heard and experienced here today with new friends. And we look forward to seeing you back in this space tomorrow morning. On your way out, please continue to engage with our staff and our team and our live art that's outside. Thank you. We'll see you again tomorrow.